we're gonna get started. People might be trickling in, but we'll get going. This is the topic of real-time data with a focus on supply and demand. And I'm Jamie Herbert, founder and CEO of Bridgecare. And we are a white labeled software to support community and data management for the early childhood ecosystem. Mostly we work with childcare and pre-K programs, but really we span the scope of all early childhood education and care, as well as going into out-of-school programs, after-school programs, and wraparound services. And we like to say that we're your childcare infrastructure in a box. So we have the modules that basically are everything your agency or your local community could need to support the childcares in your network. Mostly that's focusing on like all licensed childcares or all the pre-K programs in your system. But it's really up to you who's included in that system. And actually, we'll talk with Trying Together about how they've managed that. But this is Cara Ciminillo.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cara Ciminillo. I'm Executive Director for Trying Together. We are located in the city of Pittsburgh, go Steelers, and we serve Southwest Pennsylvania, so about 10 or 12 counties in Southwest Pennsylvania. And we are what you'd probably call, I should say we were formerly the Pittsburgh Association for the Education of Young Children. So we used to be an affiliate, and then if everyone remembers the AEYCs went through restructuring. So we rebranded to Trying Together, but we are what you would call sort of the intermediary in our region for early care and education programs. So do three big buckets of work: advocacy, support, quality, and community partnerships. So that's a little bit about me.
So a little overview of what we're going to talk about today. Did a brief intro, check. And then we are going to talk about just what are we talking about when we talk about supply and demand data. Something that everyone wants and doesn't quite have a lot of times, but like what questions are we really trying to answer? What are we really talking about when we talk about supply and demand data? Because it's a really broad bucket, has a lot of different use cases. Then we're going to get into the Trying Together example of how they have leveraged supply and demand data, why they needed it, where they used it, how they're looking ahead, and also like the challenges and successes. I think in that journey, we'll try to be really real with you about it, but also talk about the exciting opportunities. And then looking ahead, what's possible and where are we excited about things that are happening all across the country with supply and demand data. So actually, and we would love to make this interactive. We're sitting because we don't want this to be like a big presentation, and so please feel free to like ask questions throughout, chime in if you have any additions, maybe something that you want to hear about that we're not covering, like please make this interactive. And same with folks on the Zoom and online. We've got someone in the audience here, Holly, our head of product at Bridgecare. She's going to be monitoring the chat to make sure that your questions can get answered as well. But on the topic of supply and demand, anyone want to call out what they think of when they think of supply and demand data and why it's needed? Okay, yeah. Yep. Like that. Availability in your area.
Potential decisions to expand.
Yeah. For providers or for who?
Everyone. I mean, for providers to choose to expand and then have more services to the field.
Yeah. Great. Feel free to add if you have more, but those are all aspects, right? And so there's just a lot to this topic that is broadly said supply and demand. And of course, supply and demand is one pocket of the greater data picture. But when you look at, especially pre-pandemic, mostly what supply and demand was, talk about childcare deserts, right? Those are basically understood based on license capacity, as like we all know, right? And census data. There is so much difference between that information and the true supply and demand, right? And so there's a big gap between what most folks operate off of and where we want to be with really understanding the granularity of who needs what, where, and all that comes along with that. So at Bridgecare, we like to think about this in terms of really narrowing in on like, what are we talking about when we talk about supply and demand? We kind of generally break it into two schools of thought, or two kind of big buckets, maybe the micro of it and the macro of it. So most of the points that were called out are on the micro, really matching kind of one-to-one, right? Really a family looking for care and a provider filling slots, making sure that they can easily find each other. Or when new slots come online, like when new providers open up. I mean, we all know how important it is to increase supply. Part of what's so important about supply and demand data is how important is it? Where is it, right? But we know that there's a need for more supply and that staff shortages are a problem right now, and that there's just overall need for increase in supply. So when we bring that supply online, we need to make sure that families can quickly and easily find it, right? So there's the micro side of that. There's also the macro side, which is more around the big picture. Where do we place investments? How do we think about, I mean, we've all been experiencing the past couple of years, all this money coming in to be able to support the ecosystem, but where does it go? How do we use it intelligently? How do we know to make sure it's going to the right zip codes or the right communities? And where's the data to support those decisions that we're making, rather than just going on kind of anecdotes or gut on that. So those are kind of the way that we think about it, because in a system where you don't have to put, a provider does not have to report their availability, and families are kind of looking all over the place, right? So much is happening word of mouth. There's many different websites that they can be looking on. Maybe they just go to providers directly. It's hard to get, and we'll talk about this in the challenges, but it's hard to get 100% number of openings right now for every age group exactly what we want, and a complete picture of where families are looking. I mean, the reality is that the funding doesn't really support providers having to operate in the system. So there are just inherent challenges with the system. But we can get to a place that is not just using license capacity and census and move much closer, especially when we think about, okay, what are we really trying to get at? What are the questions? How can we answer those questions with the data that we have, and then create systems that are able to capture that information real time? So that's what we think about it. We recognize that there are challenges. They have not necessarily gone away, but we've created systems and practices and resources for providers and families that really get us to much greater insights about what's happening in our community. So with that.
So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Pittsburgh is located in the county of Allegheny, so Allegheny County, Pennsylvania. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we came to this work, our experience, what's worked, what's not, what opportunities have come as a result of this. So let's see, March 6th, for us, March 16th was like the day, right, where our sort of whole world shut down. And I have a couple of Pennsylvania colleagues in here, so they can attest to this. We were a state that was definitely squishy in terms of our response to the pandemic, whether childcare was to be opened or closed. And there wasn't a lot of sort of good, consistent communication. I think maybe we've all experienced that at the beginning of COVID. There wasn't good sort of consistent communication. But what we knew March 16th was that childcare needed to shut down. And there was a period of time around whether or not programs could serve essential workers, and then what was the process for serving essential workers in terms of their caregiving. And what we soon got is that sort of intermediary in our county were a whole lot of employers, a whole lot of families calling us saying, sort of, what's the status of childcare? Can they be open? Are they open? If so, where are they? And quite frankly, we, in Allegheny County, we have 600 licensed programs, and we had about 600 relative providers or family friend and neighbor providers. So the unlicensed related provider. So we had about 1,200 programs or caregivers in our county. And then there were additional sort of programming out, we call them out of school time. So I don't know if that's what other folks use in their states, but our out of school time provider community. And then obviously there were summer programs, right? So all of these typically existed. And at the point of shutdown, folks were a little unsure of what's the status. So they started coming to us and we said, well, you know, we knew anecdotally because we were fielding calls from childcare programs who were open and who were closed. And who was seeking a waiver and who wasn't seeking a waiver, but there was no way for the public to really capture that information. So we got connected with Bridgecare, which was a great marriage to start, I will say, because in many ways, I think what was most important to us at that point was what can we do quickly to respond quickly, and what can we do that's customizable for us given our situation. And so we embarked on creating a finder tool that was really meant to capture as best as we could the existing public data, and then marrying that with our programs sort of updates about their open and closed status. And so I'm sure most states, right, you have, ours is called Compass. You go to the main website that the state has, and you can search out childcare programs. Our primary site did not at that point offer open and closed information. It just was a list of programs. So there wasn't anywhere in our state that information. So we could do that by county. So we had programs that we had relationships with. We offered, we were in sort of consistent communication through the coaches that supported them and through weekly roundtables. And then we just said, hey, we're going to push out this communication and we need you very quickly to sort of update whether you're open or closed based on whatever information you've given the state. So because everything was really fluid. So the initial was we're closed, but then it was really fluid. People were figuring out, could they get the waiver, not get the waiver? Waivers were flowing. That's a whole nother spreadsheet I just remembered. Waivers were sort of flowing every day, right? So that portal really became that initial sort of supply information and was really, really helpful. That was like March to May, and then June, formally everyone could reopen that wanted to reopen. But we were also headed into summertime. And as we all know, sort of the caregiving programming sometimes changes in the summer, right? It's not just maybe 0 to 5, it's also full day for school agers. So that information was sort of fluid for summer. And we started having summer programs that wanted to reopen, and we're trying to figure out how do we communicate with families so that we could get the information that we're open and available to families. So we're like, okay, well, maybe the finder tool can also be the repository for not only licensed childcare, but also typical summer programmings. So we get through the summertime, and then we start to head toward the fall. Now, everyone's from a different place in the country. Everyone experienced COVID probably really differently. Allegheny was not one of the counties that suffered in sort of significant ways like the East Coast did. So I will say we operated with a lot of the way that we operated was this anticipation of it's going to get worse, it's going to get worse, and we've got to somehow get ahead of it. It definitely was bad. We were affected, but we weren't quite in sort of the shutdown that say New York City or Philadelphia was, right? And so some of what we anticipated provided us with opportunities to sort of get ahead of where we thought we might need to go or want to go with this tool. And that was a good thing. As you know, folks reopened, and I'll say even to this day, it's still like this slow trickle, right, of families coming back to caregiving. Jen's here, Jen's one of my colleagues, she could tell you. If we look at our CCW, our Child Care Works subsidy list pre-pandemic to now, it's about, is it like half? Yeah, it's a drop of over 20,000 kids. So we've really seen like a slow trickle back into the childcare sort of space. So our programs are open. We have that supply information, but that demand need has really been slow and squishy since the beginning of the pandemic. And I think in part, this tool's allowed us to say, okay, how can we sort of plan for what might be ahead. And especially, and to your point around sort of where do we invest and what will happen with allocations if we see, a win at the federal level or more gains at the state level? How can we make sure that as demand increases, supply is there? So that tool's really been sort of the basis for having a repository of capturing that information. So I think we can go to the next slide. So I'll say in all of this, I think what was really clear to us is that everything had to be about centering the child and families. So I mentioned that, in the beginning, March to May, childcare mostly shut down. Some folks reopened with waivers. That was sort of a squishy time. We headed into summer, then there was the summer programming that started coming on board. We headed toward the fall. In our county, all of our school districts mostly remain closed in the fall. But our DHS invested in something called community learning hubs. And those were basically programs that were going to be open and available during the school day for school age children, for those children who typically would be in school, but they have a parent that has to be at work. And so they need a safe place to go to do their remote learning. So our county invested in something called community learning hubs, and those community learning hubs also had to come online so that families could find those locations. So at all points, what we really saw as being really important around the use of this tool is saying, how do we make sure there's a one place, a one-stop shop for finding all of your care needs, birth through high school? And so our Finder tool now is actually a Finder tool. We just call it the Allegheny Finder tool, but it has several URLs. It's Allegheny childcare, it's Allegheny school age, and it's Allegheny summer programs. All of those, depending on whatever URL you use, they all point back to the same Finder tool that has the same amount of information. So for childcare, over time, we were able to add a whole lot of functionality. So you can tour, you can do a virtual tour, you can directly message childcare programs or any program. You can learn about vaccine status. So if it's a program, it has all of their staff vaccinated or what their policy is. There are public revenue streams that they accept. Their hours, because the other thing that changed frequently over time was programs hours. Sometimes, I don't know if this is how it was for your areas, but, and this is still true, there are a lot of programs that sort of have a truncated program day. So they used to be open maybe 7 or 6:30 to 6, and now they're really open like 8:30 to 5. So those have changed over time. A lot of our non-traditional hour folks have not quite yet gone back to their non-traditional hours. So updating their hours, all of that is in there. Photos of their inside of their programs. Like many of you, the visits into programs was not something you could do. And so we wanted to make sure, how can families still learn about programs? How can they learn about the ways that they're mitigating COVID? Well, you can upload pictures, you can upload videos, you can do the virtual tour, you can schedule a tour, you can find out about public revenue streams. I think one of the great features that we love is you can search by, like I'm going from home to work, what's along my route from home to work? Or, which is, I think, another really cool feature, I'm going to put in, say, my mom's address because I drop in the morning, but in the afternoon, my mom picks up. So what's sort of in between my house and my mom's house? So there's all different ways that you can search for programs. And that tool's really been something that's evolved over time based on us responding both to the needs of families regarding the pandemic, but also what we knew to be true about the way families operate and what families were looking for. So we love the tool. We've since, actually, I'd say from the very beginning, once we got the initial tool set up, we started doing a lot of sort of webinars with employers, because you even did a couple webinars with us, that's right. So early in COVID days, we have big employers in our area, PNC, UPMC, lots of universities, but a lot of those employers were saying, how do we support our employees to find childcare? So we would do webinars with HR folks. Jamie would come on those calls with me, and we would walk them through sort of the childcare system at a macro level, and then childcare micro, so at our region or at our area county level, and sort of what's available to them. And we teach them how to use the Finder tool. So we've got employers that can utilize the tool. We now invest in marketing of the tool, so that families know about where you can go to get this information. So and we've added things around, so with the website link, we'll add like documents around what to look for when choosing quality. So we know that there's an opportunity also to educate families while you're using the Finder tool. Obviously our QRIS system, the star rating is associated with all of the programs. So we've really over time customized it so that it was sort of relevant to where we are and at the time of where we are in terms of COVID. So that's a little bit about sort of our case study. I think we're going to switch to the next slide and talk about.
Yeah, and just from a system perspective, I think some of the things that are kind of underlying what Cara is talking about of, well, what makes all that possible? Two main things. I think one is an integrated system that has a central database. So their CCR and our work that happens in their specialist administrator portal is connected to the exact same data and even experience that families are seeing on their public search finder tool. Providers have their own portal. So how do we get this information from providers? So many people are still putting out surveys, right? To get a snapshot of providers, but not seeing over time directional change, or how are, in response to this new funding source, or in response to some new thing that happened in the COVID or whatever, how did providers respond to that? Did they close more? Seeing those reactions right over time, and then also being able to respond with what we know about the data. Providers are able to put that in their own portal, so that we can get that. And then anytime an update is made across any of those fully integrated portals, it's all one central database. So real time, instantly, you see a family provider, brand new provider comes on, a learning hub. Families instantly see that they can find a place for their child to go for their learning needs. And that's how they can fill those slots so quickly. So this is the important thing for families, right? Finding the things, but how does that happen? It's a central database with the portals for each of those users, which also really important that they're designed for those users, so that the user experience is built for families in mind, built for providers in mind, built for those specialists in mind, so that they use them, and that we have the data then come in, because if they're not going to use the portal, then they don't get the data, right? So then all of that feeds into the administrator portal for those data insights. So families can see, oh, there's an opening, I'm going to go there, but also Cara's team can see, oh, we really need more availability over here. We have all these families searching and no openings, or we need to engage these providers more. We're seeing that we have, not enough family childcare is participating in providing us availability, and we want to do a special outreach on that, so they can really get granular with the data that they have.
Yeah, and I'll just add, maybe go to the next slide, because I don't know if I'm talking ahead of myself. I'll just add, as programs, obviously programs are now open, and I imagine all of you are hearing the same thing, which is I'm in a staffing crisis, right? So this is my licensing number. This is typically the program number that I operate, but I've even had to scale that back because I'm short. We have a Star 4 NACE accredited program in the building that our office is in. They are short 8 staff. So they cannot get staff. So what we know to be true too is that for many programs, they're beginning to use their profile on the Finder tool as the way in which they market their program. So part of what we've said is, if you're trying to attract families, or you're trying to have staff learn more, or people that are interested in a job learn more about you, and you don't have a website, because it takes an investment and programs don't have that kind of money, here's an opportunity for you to just spend some time building out your program profile. You can have pictures of teachers, you can talk about your teacher, you can make it as detailed as you want to make it. And this is a way to do that. And for many programs, it's a hopeful tool because they've never had anything like this, and it's friendly and usable. But what I like, just going back to what Jamie said, whether you are the family specialist, which our staff uses family specialists supporting families through our early learning resource center. So whether you're the family specialist searching for childcare, or you're just a family at home, you pulled it up on your phone or on your computer, you're searching, whether you're an employer wanting to support your employees, or whether you're a program and you have a profile listed, you're all coming from the same place and all the information is the same. You may use it a little bit differently. Some things may be more important to you than other things, but it all comes from one central place. And it is really child and family friendly. Like it centers the child and it centers the family. So in terms of like the challenges, I'll say like, this is not a new challenge, right? It's why there's a shared services conference. We know that folks are understaffed. And so really sort of utilizing the tool to the extent that they can is something that we're trying to help them understand can help them support them get to the goals they want to get to, which is full enrollment or marketing their program or sharing it with interested candidates if they use the tool. And so we've done a number of things to try and help make it as easy as possible for programs to update their information. They get text messages, they get emails. I think we even shifted from in the beginning, Holly, didn't we, where you would have to update your information regularly. And then we said, okay, no, actually only updated if it's different today than it was at the time before. So like, we've really tried to respond to what makes most sense in terms of how providers use the tool and how families need to see the information and made pathways to make it as easy as possible. So they get text messages, they get emails. What am I missing?
Yeah, and they can come in the portal, but even in the text messages, it's in plain language. So
yeah,
it's, last time you reported that you had one infant opening. Is that still the case?
Yeah.
And then they can say, oh no, I actually have 2 toddler openings now.
Yeah.
Or they can say, oh no, full, right? Like don't have any openings. So that's really, we find that texting is not the best for every type of provider, right? I mean, our providers that have like 15 locations and they have an administrator who's managing their openings, they'll go in the portal and they'll do their thing, right? But many providers are like a single person or, they're the everything, like, right? And so they're not at their computer, like they barely do email, right?
right.
So for them, especially like a special push, and they often don't use any technology, right? So like a special push with them around, hey, opt in for texting, and then you can just quickly text us back in the course of your day or whenever it's convenient for you, right? It doesn't have to be also right away. And we have really, really high engagement rate with texting. Now we don't have all providers in texting, but the ones that opt in, very high response rate because it's super easy for them, and then we update the portal for them. And then also by email. So if they do email, it's really easy to just say, I don't have any openings. And that at least lets us know it's accurate, right? So you have 0, there's very, very little incentive for providers to go out of their way to tell you they have no openings, right? Probably all experience that. So making it really, really easy for those providers to let you know that they don't have any openings. And then to the point of like lack of incentive and also just how, not on their computer and all of these things. Another thing is integration with childcare management software. So really meeting providers where they're at, if they're using software, which we still know that I think the majority don't, but if they do, and of course we're here and we believe in getting providers to like adopt that. And while we're trying to get them there, how are we also meeting their needs now? Is what I was just talking about with texting and emailing and all of that. But I mean, ultimately what we want to do is have them using software to support their business, have it all integrated, the ecosystem benefit from the data that's in there. One of the ways is supply information. And Cara, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about your thoughts for that, but also how you think about Bridgecare fitting in with that.
Yeah. Sorry, I was still thinking about no, my head was still on the text. I was just going to say around texting, I think one of the things that we have definitely found to be true for our programs is that, and I think this is what was really helpful in the beginning with Bridgecare as we were trying to customize it, is they spent a lot of time doing focus groups with our programs to understand what's most useful and helpful to you, and really sort of editing, customizing, and responding. And I think that's, Holly, what's your title? Like product head of, yeah, head of product, right? So like Holly, I feel like is very human centered. It's how do I help the humans that are involved in this work really leverage the tool to the extent that it can be leveraged, and how do we create something that speaks to them in a way that's relevant and meaningful. And so I don't want to, you know, the texting thing is a big piece because we all know they're not sitting on emails. And so making it, like you said, plain simple terms is really important, and the texting has been a really great feature. So I did want to say that. And then what did you just want me to talk about?
Yeah, well, while we're on that thread, I think what's really interesting is how we designed all of that is we called providers, and we actually understood how do you, this is actually another point on here, is providers report openings differently.
Yeah.
Not every type of provider thinks about their openings, almost none of them, as the way the state does, right? Or even us sitting here want to know about openings by age group. That's not by and large how providers run their business. And so asking them to fill out a form with, do you have how many openings for infants, toddlers, preschool, school age, or whatever your license age groups are, which Allegheny has like 1 million. But how many do you have? 9?
Yes.
Yeah. Pennsylvania does. But you know, they don't think about their business purely in terms of license age groups. So what we said, okay, we need to, like, we had started with responding to the ask of, we need to collect by license age groups. And it was kind of a simple form. And we found out that we got really bad data by doing that, like really bad, because what would happen is providers would have an opening for 1 of 3 slots. Like I could take any child over the age of 2 or whatever, right? And so that spans 3 age groups. So how is that provider putting in that data? 1 for each age group. So they're reporting 3 times as many openings as they actually have. They just randomly pick 1 of the 3, maybe the one that they kind of wish it was, but if a family comes for another age group, they'll take them for that. Like, how are they reporting that? And more importantly, we don't know. They're probably all across the board. So this data that we're collecting has basically no integrity behind it, and we don't actually know what we're dealing with. So putting all this effort into collecting information, and ultimately we can't trust it, right? So we completely redesigned the process, and how we did that was by starting with calling 100 providers and just saying, tell us, like, I don't know, how'd you word it, Holly?
Started by asking how many openings you have.
Yeah.
Usually the question was like, well, what, how old is your child?
Yeah.
That was the question.
So it was like in their own words, but also even getting to the word openings was a discovery process, because a lot of our clients were asking us to put in how many vacancies do you have or something. And what we heard from providers is they were like, oh, I thought you said vaccines, which is fun, just a funny learning, right? Like you just don't even think of when you're at this like high system.
Their head
level,
is so
right?
in the vaccine space.
Yes, their head was in the vaccine space, and the first 3 letters are the same. So they're just like, oh, I must be talking about vaccines. Oh, what's a vacancy? Like a hotel? Like what is that? So openings, we had thought of spots. They were like, that's not spots, openings. So that's the word we came to. It's customizable. Our clients can choose to change it if they want, but we bring that expertise to like talking to providers. And then we said, how do you talk about your openings? Like, and they're like, well, how old is your child? Okay, we can take on this day and this. So that's how we've configured a very unique experience around getting that correct information, so you can report future openings for multiple age groups, starting with the correct data, then reporting that out to answer the questions you're looking for. So is it how many infants could we take today? Well, that's putting a 1 in the category of how many infant openings they had. But if you're asking how many openings do we have, like by percentage, right? Then you want to maybe put a third if it's an opening for 3. So you kind of choose how you want to represent your data in the Bridgecare system. But again, it's starting with data we can trust, knowing exactly what are we talking about here, because providers are able to put it in a way that makes sense to them. So that's also speaking to the second point here about providers reporting openings in a way that makes sense to them, because it's different for everybody, especially across like centers or pre-K programs versus family childcares. Super different how they often think about their classrooms versus they're just, family.
We also learned, and I imagine this was true, I mean, we certainly heard it in sort of national conversations, that our home-based providers were much more stable with their enrollment than our center-based providers, right? So there would be less sort of need to update in the home-based space, because families really were choosing smaller locations, something that felt more like being at home during COVID than they had maybe before. So where we're seeing a lot of sort of the range, I think, in the way in which programs respond is in that center space, whether you're a small center or a big center with a big infrastructure and might be multi-site. So, I appreciated that. And I think that's warranted more success on our end, that there's just a level of customization, given the range of kind of types of providers that we have in our county.
So the thing I was talking about was childcare management software.
Oh, yeah.
integration.
Okay, so, so we've had, so over time, this tool has evolved and expanded and added a whole lot more functionality. And, where we are today is now thinking about, so I'll also just say, initially, when we contracted, we really thought of this as sort of a 1 or 2 year tool to support COVID. And as we kept going sort of more and more into this, really recognizing that, for our county, this really could be the one-stop shop for like ever. It's the tool that we use as our county to communicate care and learning opportunities for children in our county. And so with that, I think we as the early learning intermediaries have really said, okay, what other expanded functionality exists that we can really leverage and help support our programs to take advantage of. And certainly the child care management software is an area and a space that we're starting to head toward. We've already surveyed our programs to find out what software do they use most and how do we make sure that this tool integrates with that software, so that, again, we're not putting the burden on providers to have to enter their information in multiple locations, but that the data can get pulled from a few sort of primary locations, and then they just have to do the update in terms of the real-time openings or vacancies that they have. And so child care management software is something that we're going to look into as our sort of next phase of supporting programs use of technology.
Yeah. Any other thing you want to talk about in terms of challenges?
I don't think so. Yeah.
So
And we've talked a lot about what's working well. Certainly the texting's working well. Having multiple ways to sort of input their updates works well. Having multiple portals. So a specialist portal, family specialist portal, a provider portal, sort of your public facing portal, but all drawing from the same information. I'll also just say, and you should check ours out, AlleghenyChildcare.org if you are on your phone. Ours is really cute too. It's like really, I mean, there's right. We've seen like states sort of systems listing, right? And it doesn't feel warm and friendly. It doesn't really exemplify or feel playful like children. But what I really like also is aesthetically, it's really attractive and it's easy to use. And it feels like something that is family friendly. So, and I don't think you can, that's really actually an important feature, right? People don't go to websites that they don't like to use, that doesn't feel good, that isn't easy to search through. Ours is really easy, so you should check it out. Sorry.
great. No. And then, yeah, we talked about even like the integration between parent search, specialist search, and all the like integrated analytics. So you have all of that in one place.
Yeah, and I should actually add to this. So we have a data team that works in our organization, and we, as the intermediary, get asked. We sit at a lot of stakeholder tables related to scaling up at the city level, stakeholder tables related to the sort of scaling up at the county level. They come to us and say, "What's the status of childcare?" The other beautiful thing about this Finder tool is the analytics part. Oh, there you go. Okay. Oh, that teed you right up for it. Okay. Is the analytics part, because it is the place to go to then get the information to then be able to feed it back to decision makers. So,
yeah.
How is that shared amongst?
Great question. So Kara's like, I know that Peter works in the team.
I know that my director of data has access.
So there's certain options that you have. So folks who have access to the administrator portal, you can also control permissions around reporting and analytics. So not everyone on their team even has access to the reporting and analytics. But then you might also be asking about, like, what about community members who you don't want to give access, or you shouldn't give access to this portal, right? Although there's also the ability to have permissions in the other aspects. So if you want someone who's only coming in and doing reporting, but you don't want them to, for example, be able to edit provider information at all or see family information, you can also control their permissions outside of reporting.
So
Yeah.
is there an ability to have a viewer where you have like
Yeah.
a set of standard reports that can then be viewed by anyone who has access to the form, like providers, parents, whoever?
Like basic information that
Yeah.
seems like,
Even like seeing
Mhm.
this, like, it's probably valuable for CFI.
Yeah.
To say, hey, we're seeing this.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Here's where our area of focus is.
Yeah. So you can create a real-time dashboard for folks to be able to view. You can also do like automated sended reports. So maybe funders want to see monthly or quarterly or something like that. So folks who you don't want to have access in the system, but you want to be able to give regular updates to, and you can automate those so you don't have to think about it. So we have 3 ways that we do like data and reporting in the Bridgecare system. One is ad hoc reporting, so full data extracts. And this is kind of the point of this whole system, right? So every single interaction that happens in the software, that's updating information or a family filtering in a search, gives us insight about the ecosystem, right? A lot of it connects back to supply and demand. Every single one of those interactions is captured and then reportable. So you can know, for example, not just how many families are searching for care for infants or whatever, but also, are they looking for overnight care? Are they looking for weekend care? Are they looking for particular special needs? Are they looking for Montessori programs? Like, I mean, I don't know how much you're interested in also like the curriculum aspects, but you have every level of that information about what they're searching for. And not one at a time, like by age group, quality rating. Are families using the quality rating? Do they even know what it is, right? We've added education aspects in because we hear from families a lot of times they don't know what it is, and we think it's important that a lot of investment goes into it, and they should know what it is and be using that. So you can kind of, for reaction, right, to like how do we help families better? Like, what are we looking for? But also knowing where we have to then put more emphasis on supply, and maybe we need greater investment. All of that's in there. So just kind of so start on like, what are we even talking about in terms of what's available in here? And then you can create multiple dashboards. So maybe you want one supply and demand, and then you want one that's like specifically for a group of funders, or specifically a community, or one family facing that you want to have specific information about. So you can make those available either on like a website or by sending them out. Does that answer your question? Sorry, I wrote one. I got distracted in my thought. So the ad hoc reports, you can extract any information from the system. You can build your own reports. Our deep belief is that this is your data. First of all, you own it. We don't own it. Your data, and you should have access to it, and you should be able to use it, and you should use it, and we want you to use it. So everything is extractable, and you can kind of take it into Excel or other systems and do whatever kind of data you want, kind of analysis you want to do with it. We also have an internal data visualization aspect. So creating your own charts, graphs, counts, your dashboard to view. That's what this is actually, like a visualization of those data extracts, but inside of the system, and you can create your own. And that's kind of the things that usually you're going to want to share out. And then also we have the opportunity to do canned reports, which are like a pre-formatted, like maybe you have to do a report to your state or something like that. We have clients who have very strict requirements around reports, and they put a lot of time into generating those reports every month and pulling information from everywhere. We can actually create that standardized canned report for you to your specs and have it available in the Bridgecare system for you to just have access to. Couple ways we think about data, but it's really important to us because we know it's important to you, and yeah, that's ultimately critical if we're going to get more funding to the space and really support where the needs are.
yeah, I'll just, I have this thing I've said in my organization for a long time. I think a lot of times we in our early childhood space, it's like death by anecdote. Like we have an anecdote for everything, but we don't have the data. And so it's really helpful, especially we've got a lot of funders in our community. They're very supportive of early childhood. They hear anecdotes all the time and then they think that it's a real thing. And then now we can say, well, actually, let me drill down into the data and see what's really going on. And this certainly has been another feature that has allowed us to sort of fact check anecdotes that folks hear and say, is there truth to it? Is there not? Is it maybe that they just didn't know about X or they didn't know to search in this way, or maybe it's really another issue and the data helps to provide clarity. So
Yeah.
and
Probably going a little further than this conversation says to go. So feel free to say this is beyond the scope of this presentation. But I'm really curious that this data been utilized at all. The funders are one thing, but at the point of that.
Yeah, it depends on who our client is ultimately. So, well, I don't know. Do you want to talk about trying together, Allegheny?
yeah, I mean, we have certainly, especially at the beginning of COVID, where what we were hearing from employers and from families was really needing to know who was opened and closed in real time. And I like to think that maybe we had some influence on some of the state's decisions. They did add to Compass an open and close feature to our state system. And we have definitely used some of the data or things that we have learned from this to help feed back what we know to be true. We've not seen any sweeping policy changes, but we've used the data for sure in our conversations.
And I think that's the case of most of our local community or county level clients, because I mean, maybe you just don't even know how you impacted, right? Like it's just a big, greater separation between mostly state policymaking and our clients there. But our state level clients, I would say absolutely in terms of, I mean, the state of Texas, the Texas availability portal is a Bridgecare portal similar to what Allegheny uses. And they also have dashboards that give them insights and have, I think, certainly made policy decisions, or at least resource allocation decisions throughout the course of COVID with those supply and demand insights. And also statewide for Alabama's pre-K, first class pre-K program, as Bridgecare is used, and not just actually for supply and demand, but for their full enrollment and placements and everything. And I mean, that's a very successful program that continues to get more funding year over year and to support that greater investment year over year. So where kids are going and how they're getting placed and where there's more need. So those are examples of, I think usually that's happening more, maybe unfortunately, but when the states are actually the users of the system than when the counties are.
Yeah, I will add now that as I was thinking about it, I'm like, where else have we used it? So certainly infant toddler classrooms have virtually disappeared in our county from the beginning of COVID to now. And we've used this information to help inform the way in which our county invests some of their ARP dollars to fund the creation and opening of more infant toddler contracted slots. And that RFP literally just came out like last week. So it's brand new. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mentioned reports to funders, but certainly, I mean, we have clients who are like, we are the data source basically for the state. So we're constantly sending them reports. Governors are like, I'm going to be on a press conference. I need this number, right? Like how many openings we have or whatever. And they go to them for that.
I was just thinking about the data with the, I think we're looking at is, doing this co-design for our local shared services. And, all of our discussions obviously go back to the anecdotes of what people need, which I don't think there's any validity to that because everybody kind of has different circumstances in their individual centers. So we're looking for a way to utilize some of the data, collect data to be able to better inform what is it that people actually need. Where can we get the most bang for the buck for these economies of scale to maybe help the people in the alliance? So that's something y'all have experience with. That your platform is capable of crunching some of that data to determine where the best needs are, like the shared services framework.
I mean, I maybe like, I want to know maybe more specifically what kind of questions you're asking. I want to say yes, but I'm not sure we're like always the right solution for all data questions. Can you give me an example of maybe one of the questions you're trying to answer?
Well, I think, you know, when you look at shared services, you're trying to, you know, talk about the iron triangle.
Mhm.
So, but, you know, basically we have like this limited budget for like, okay, there's only so many things where we can, you know, apply some money to be able to help different
Right.
providers. Well, what of those different aspects, is it the iron triangle? Is it,
Hmm.
you know, combining some payroll functions, et cetera, what's going to have the most bang for the buck?
Got it.
And how do we quantify that in terms of, you know, matching up what we're going to provide money towards compared to like what the actual needs are that will provide the highest value add.
Got it. So we don't have any support until we are in place, right? Because we're collecting data once we are in place from families, from providers. If you're trying to like scope out what are the needs in our community before Bridgecare is in place, we don't have like a, you know, survey tool or something like that. In terms of trying to collect that information, it's really once we're in place, we have this constant monitoring of where are providers, what are their needs. I don't know.
Well, I noticed something on your slides also about like, you know, like expansion and acquiring.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes, exactly. Yeah,
You know, that might be another, I think, useful policy tool.
Yeah.
To be able to show, so I'll give you an example here in Texas, like, you know, we have this kind of thing, like, they would like to provide high quality care in child care districts.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yet you have to wait a year before you can get into the Texas Rising Star System and start to get more revenue. Well, there's an opportunity there for local policymakers to bridge that fiscal gap between
yeah,
Yeah.
waiting a year or not. But I would think we need to provide them with data that shows this is a viable, this is the child care desert, we're going to be able to make this work.
yes.
You know, and then people can start to allocate funds.
Yeah.
Towards that.
Yeah, I think it's the perfect example of like, you have to start with the data, right? You have to start with having like insights into what is going on. And so that's where I think Bridgecare coming in can be the system to support you tracking that over time. And like, we have a question. Okay, let's dive into the data and try to answer it, right? Figure out, is our gut about we need more centers here, right? Or what does the data say? Like to your point. But until we are in place, we can't support that in anticipation of like, well, should we invest in this? But
I've often thought about, to your point, you know, I wish we'd had Bridgecare before, where I knew the way in which families search for childcare and how were they searching between work and home? Between home and work, or were they sort of, what was their traffic, right? Which way did they go? Because I'm assuming now, again, it's an anecdote, I'd have to look at our search data, Holly would be able to tell me, that now people are looking just near home because more people are working from home. Like, that's the kind of information. So is it really a desert? Or is it, in fact, now there's a greater need in certain areas because people are working from home more frequently, and actually you need more childcare nearby home versus their office location,
Well, and that was,
and seeing that change
that
over
was one of
time.
the things we brought up. If you look at some of the lower income neighborhoods, the proportion of people that work from home is much lower.
Right.
So
is it actually where they go for work and what?
So it may be a childcare desert, but they're working in the other part of town anyway.
Right. And they would prefer to do it right.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, but the data would support that rather than.
yes,
You know.
yeah. So I guess the case to be made is you should get started with Bridgecare pretty soon. So you can
Well, I use Texas childcare.
yes, absolutely. Then, yeah, yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I have some questions about where you say demand by age group. Is that really search by age group when you say demand? Is that where you get the data from the searches?
Yeah, search, and if you have the CCR&R function and you're using that with Bridgecare, then also it gets it from there. So basically any information that we're getting around what folks are looking for by age group, and then like we said, also by quality rating or other segmentation of data.
And then my second question has to do with the CCR&R. What is the relationship then with the state as accepting this as a supplementary report? and like get some ability to connect with them, what's their view of it?
That's a good question. Yeah, it's a good
It's
question.
difficult in most states because
Yeah.
they have a required.
Yeah.
Order that they
Yeah, and I think most states have invested heavily in a contract to sort of create their system. And so it's not an easy thing to necessarily shift over time. You know,
tell me about your CC farm connection.
Well, you don't have a state required system, right?
correct.
For CCRNR.
Your state has a system.
Mm.
I know the federal requirements that all states have. It's not hundred.
Compass is our.
Oh, like
yeah,
a place where, so the federal requirement, as I understand, it's like a place where providers are listed with their
Yes.
zip code.
And
So
that's
some are in a
what, and,
spreadsheet.
and that's what we have. So we have Compass and it's a spreadsheet and you can search by zip code. Yeah, yeah. But it doesn't have the level of functionality.
Oh,
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
there
yeah,
are the differences, but sometimes because they say it's a patient service.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, what I am sure is that our leadership would love to do more around helping families find childcare. And, you know, they have a lot of priorities and they're figuring out what's most important.
So I don't think I'm asking the question correctly, but CPR because I don't know. But they have some input into your system. That's what.
The public data, the way it's drawn.
Yeah, so, well, and I think where the opening is for trying together is, and I misunderstood what you meant by CCRNR. So there's like the helping families just look on their own CCRNR aspect, right? But then there's also the like more traditional, they call in, you do a referral for them. Send it. So that's what I was thinking of.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what trying together, ELRC is a collaborative of organizations that they do that. That's in
And-
Pennsylvania's early learning
Yeah,
resource center.
and our family specialists, not trying to gather staff, but our partners' staff, who are the family specialists, use both Compass and the Child Care Finder tool to support families searching for childcare. Yeah, yeah.
But I think the opening a lot of times in states where we do navigate that there's a state system, but communities find that to be insufficient for their community. They're also not getting the data that they need to support their work. And I think the pandemic has created an opportunity of like, we demand more, we need more, families need more, we're doing it. And that's, I think, where we've just seen some communities just move forward with it. And how I think we really play very nicely with those state systems, even though we're side by side, is we connect to license and inspection reports. So we're really leveraging existing systems and making sure that families get all the information that they need, especially around safety. And then also quality rating systems that we are highlighting, leveraging, educating around the QRIS systems, so that families are aware of those tools. And so like a good example is in Colorado, we're in, I think it's 35 counties now in Colorado. Their early childhood councils are using Bridgecare a lot of time. We're not the state system, but we've had a really kind of collaborative, good relationship with the state because they've seen the value that it's brought to their communities. And actually we have such great data, better data often than they're having. They have like the license data, but we have more of that like also supplemental data that's really valuable for them. So now they've created a system where the councils get supply demand data or supply data to them. Often they're collecting that through Bridgecare. And I think what created the opening for that collaboration was that we're linking to their page, like we're highlighting the resources that they have, and we're not trying to say, forget about that thing, we're everything, right? It's more, we're trying to be more like symbiotic.
One question I have is I perused your website when Alex Page in their ideas newsletter and shared information about it. What the level of risk by having kind of those camps and other programs when they're not like regulated, and you have families searching and potentially enrolling, and the risk kind of that if something should happen in those settings, and we got the referral from your website.
Yeah, it's interesting because I remember sort of the risk question at the very beginning of the pandemic, and it was from our organization, if Trying Together creates and promotes a website, are we assuming a level of risk about what's in there? And I remember us going sort of back and forth, and it comes down to, we have a level of responsibility around educating families, helping them make decisions. I mean, we put out a document that's with the website about questions you might want to ask your program about how they're mitigating COVID. So we are very clear that it's not our job to tell families what to do, but to provide them with guidance and support for asking questions so they can make the decision that's best for them. To your point, all the licensing information is in there, all of the information around what does quality mean. I remember us going back and forth, Holly, around how do we describe what star 4 means versus star 1. I forget what the language is that we used around non-licensed programs, but like all of that is in there. And then there's accompanying education materials to support them. I feel like we have a level of responsibility to support families in making their decision and making sure they have all the information and that the information is accessible. But it's a level of risk I'm willing to take in terms of like, it's not about us promoting one over the other. And I mean, that's true for even, whether I just stay in the stars in the childcare space. As the executive director of my organization, my job isn't to say one particular program is better than another particular program. It's really to help a family make decisions about what's important to them. And that's how I see the use of this tool, is it's more information in a centralized place to help support families making that decision. And so it doesn't feel risky to me in that way. I might be a fool and I might call you someday and say differently, but I don't think so.
But it is a really common concern
Yeah.
and thing to think about. And I think across the spectrum of our clients, they've landed in all kinds of different places with it. And that's the value of a tool that's configurable to what your needs are and what your risk appetite is, or how you want, even in terms of how much do you let even the licensed provider edit about their own profile.
Yeah.
Some of our clients, it's strictly license information and they can add in availability. And that's it. They're usually the licensing entity, right? Or something like that. And then community organizations tend to end up more on the spectrum of Trying Together. I would say Trying Together maybe actually also because your licensed age groups are also more flexible. They're not licensed, providers aren't licensed to serve a particular age group. They can kind of serve whatever age groups they want based on just ratio. So their system is also a little more fluid that way. So they're on the more open end, I would say, of configuration settings. And then we have lots of in between. And this comes up a lot where there's an instinct to want to include like family, friend, and neighbors. And like, we know that that's a big part of care. And a lot of it, especially in COVID, there's been a lot more funding for family, friend, and neighbors, recognizing that's a huge part of our care ecosystem. But they're often completely like unregistered even, or unknown about, and what is the oversight? There's valid questions about how much do we, not promote necessarily, but like surface them and make families aware of them, and whose responsibility is it? So where we find folks landing typically is, and I think actually Allegheny followed this too, in that they already had this entity, a post out of school
Partners,
or
Allegheny Partners for out of school time.
Yeah. So that's that was this entity that we partnered with in Allegheny, and they already had their own map, and so we pulled them together, talking about centering the family, pulled it all together. But they had some kind of like approval process for adding providers on. So in none of the places we work, are providers able to just add themselves like without any kind of oversight. There's always some kind of oversight on that. And usually where it falls more is like folks will work with like YMCAs or public schools that have programs in the summer that are funded. So there's some kind of, usually it's often a funding stream that kind of gives credibility and validation to that location or that program. So it's not necessarily licensed, but there's some kind of connection, right? That's usually where we see the scope expanding to for our clients who are concerned about the risk, but want to still serve a broader than just licensed care. But yeah, it falls anywhere in between, and it's really kind of up to you on, and then also there's the aspect of like what disclaimers you choose to put on your own platform as well, which are configurable.
And then one other question, as far as like the text messaging for updates or openings, how frequently do those go out?
You can choose the frequency for your own system, but usually it's weekly. Sometimes we have clients choose monthly, and a lot of times we also have it in conjunction with some kind of outreach, whether it's like with their coaching or with a specific outreach around phone calls. Like I think it's DC who does weekly calls, is that right? But they first send out their automated messaging, and then whoever didn't respond to their automated messaging, then they do phone calls. They started doing that through COVID because they just wanted to make sure that they're having a really, because it's changing so dynamically. They want to have a close eye so that they kind of do both parts. And then we also have an integration with ProCare for them as well. So seeing all the different pieces kind of pulling together. It's not all technology, it's not all people. It's like a really great marriage of all of the resources coming together.
Our coaches are constantly sort of reminding folks, because I think what we all hear, a lot of programs lament over their openings. And we're like, okay, so what are you doing to help communicate out that you want to fill them? Have you updated your, oh, right, I got to update my, so it's like, I don't know, there's some like communication thing where you say you got to hear it 7 times or 17 times or 20, I don't know, whatever. So we just keep, like you got to hit them a lot. And so our weekly roundtables, they get reminders, their coaches, they're reminded, they get their text message. And it's really about creating a habit of practice. And so that takes time. And especially for our field, they've been drinking out of a fire hose for 2 years. So we can't expect that it's going to be perfect quite yet.
And certainly going back to like what I know that OpEx is also very focused on is putting in systems for businesses to not have to, but like maintaining their internal business software so that those updates happen automatically. You don't have to think about it. And that definitely would be our ideal as well. But this is a great also marketing and advertising tool for that information that is in their childcare management software to get outside of their childcare management software so that families can find them. It can be leveraged also to the states or communities to know where those data is.
We've also done things, we've recorded little mini videos. So, providers, let's say they can't be on the call for how to first intro and learn how to use how to use the portal. They can go to the webinar and it teaches them how to use it in a really simplified way. So we've tried to be like all learner friendly, right? And sort of supporting them with all different ways of utilizing the tool.
Yeah, I was just gonna say.
Amy, I thought that was you, but with your mask on, I was
I know,
like,
I thought
and then I had to stick my glasses on.
So I think in terms of, tie all these pieces together as it relates to their services and, I think some of it is just this idea that once you have a data source, what information it provides, but it's like you can sister, it's like somebody just kind of helping you look at what information is available and think about what you want to do. Right. So the provider that has the bandwidth to figure out how to use portal or responsive text or might even have automation, they're putting their openings in, and then they're going to look for 5 more staff that they needed to keep their current capacity going, right? And not necessarily about, I want to open it. And if I fulfill those openings, maybe I could offer all of my staff, 44 cents an hour, but if to the extent that Cara has capacity for her staff, her team, to support the providers in looking at that data and stepping back and analyzing over time, it doesn't have everything, it doesn't have expenses, it doesn't have attendance, it isn't CMS, it doesn't have attendance tracking or invoicing. But to the extent that it has information, it could be used and it could be expanded to think about, all sorts of other pieces that might be important to like add on for Bridgecare or not. But you could do enrollment, eligibility, and specialized enrollment for your provider. So it's like you guys are charged and funded to support the parent search function. So you're using the data primarily as it relates to the parents that are calling in and wanting. But the extent that you were funded through our quality improvement system, and this is
think about enrollment differently, marketing differently.
Yeah, and I'll just add to the Finder tool. So in Allegheny County, our ELRC manages our childcare subsidy dollars. And then we have Head Start grantees and Head Start supplemental grantees, early Head Start grantees, pre-K counts grantees, and they're all in charge of managing their own filling of slots. The ELRC isn't responsible for that. We would love to see a one-stop location for sort of getting all of that information and helping drive families to all their options. So that tool's been really helpful in getting those separate parts, Head Start, early Head Start, and pre-K counts, grantees information, because some of them are just standalone Head Start centers, right? So all of that has to get in and has gotten into the Finder tool. And then the ELRC, while it's not their responsibility, it is, let me help, support you in finding quality. You have a 3-year-old, you qualify not only for, childcare subsidy, but you also qualify for Head Start. Let me help you find a program that takes both childcare subsidy and Head Start dollars, right? So like, really, it's also too an opportunity to better coordinate public use of dollars for families that are eligible for multiple programs. So in Allegheny County, that tool's acted as that one central location for knowing where all of that is.
Yeah, perfect prompt, Amy. Thank you for moving us on to where do we go also ideally with looking ahead, not just at the current, or even backward at like the history of the pandemic, but really like what can we do when we have real-time data, and what can we do when we have a system that's more coordinated and working together? And I love that Cara's always talking about centering the family, because ultimately, like when a parent with a child is wondering about, well, what care and education options do I have? They don't think in terms of funding streams. They don't even understand these funding streams a lot of the times, right? And they might not even know to go to this one other website to look for where I might qualify for public pre-K as opposed to Head Start as opposed to childcare subsidy, and what's the difference, and what does it mean for me in terms of how much is covered and what hours are covered, and all these different questions that they have, right? And have to navigate all these different places. So, where we see a lot of desire for these systems to go, and where we're playing a role in helping actually make that reality, is in like truly coordinated enrollment. And we always say that we know that like the governance and the politics around getting to coordinated enrollment is such a huge lift, and we know it's that's got the groundwork kind of has to be laid before we can come in to be the technology to make it happen. So it's no small effort by any means. I know there's a lot of places trying to get there, but some of the work that we're really most excited about right now is where that groundwork has been laid and we're able to do that. So with one single application, a family can apply to every single state pre-K funded program, local pre-K program, local subsidy, childcare, state subsidy, Head Start, all in one application. And then the application is received by the CCR&R, which in this case isn't just about making a referral, but making a referral to where they know there's an opening, where they know there's funding, even layered funding, all through one process where all those partners and collaborators are doing their evaluation. And like the public school has to do their assessment, and there's every one of those partners has different workflow to their approval process, but all coordinated through one system for the family. I mean, truly centered in the family, right? And we know it's just not possible everywhere today, but that's where I think we hope to go, to make it easy, and then also make it easy for providers to manage all of those funding sources as well. So that's something that we're really, really excited about. One of the projects we're doing that in is in Virginia, a really exciting project around coordinated enrollment there, but other places as well. And I think that's where we get excited about, like that family, that one-to-one, make it easy for families, make it easy to put them in slots. Like that's what we can do, like looking ahead with the accurate data. And then I think really getting at even more about what Amy was talking about here with the integrated systems, looking at more than just the pie of, CCR&R and search, but, and this is where we say that with childcare infrastructure in a box, because it's really all the pieces of your system not being siloed. So your coaching software has the information about your provider, has the information about your QRIS. QRIS goes into your search portal, assessments inform QRIS, right? Every one of these is connected to all of the others. And when those systems don't talk to each other, it makes them inefficient, it makes them underutilized, it creates a lot more work. You don't have the insights. So to be able to pull the reports and see, okay, well, when a provider engages with QRIS, this is what happens with, XYZ, right? In terms of their engagement with the system, you can see across all the functions. That's what a central database and integrated systems allow you to do. So the topic was a focus on supply and demand data, but we didn't want to leave this conversation without really looking bigger picture at, like, why do we care about data? What can it do when we're really using the data that we have and making these systems work really well together? Any thoughts or any questions about that? Yeah.
I have a question just kind of on the research. How accurate have you found, like, compared to what Alzheimer's? You talk about census data and data.
Yeah.
Are there major obvious differences with Alzheimer's?
Oh, yeah.
Once you have your platform.
Yeah. I mean, even just immediately, the discrepancy between licensed capacity and desired capacity. Then you talk about, okay, well, then you add staff in.
Mhm.
I mean,
3 different numbers, vastly different numbers. Yeah.
and then part-time, full-time, and
What about on the demand stuff?
oh yeah, I mean, we just know that not every family is looking for care, or what kind of care do they need, or are they looking for like pre-K programs, they're looking for childcare, do they need overnight, like depending on what the family's work life is, and maybe they only need part-time because they have a grandparent. I mean, you can't even make assumptions based on, income brackets, for example, or even like work from home or not, right? Like we can make generalizations, but we're talking about real data when we're looking at search patterns, and especially the granularity around those search patterns over time.
Are you seeing like a greater investment, like in the funds, you see like admin, philanthropy, and what's the funding sources?
Yeah, it's a little all over the board. So Texas originally was called the what was it called? It was for essential workers. It was a frontline childcare. And it was like immediate emergency response. And it was actually only technically supposed to be used by essential workers too, because no one else could access licensed childcare at that time, right? In March 2020, hard to remember. And so there was a disclaimer like, you can only proceed if you're like, or something like that, right? If you're an essential worker. And that was used with CCDBG dollars, but I think they were emergency funds through the block grant. And it actually says on the website where the fund is coming from, so you can see it. And then, but over time, they've changed the branding to Texas Child Care Availability Portal. So they've kind of rebranded that to a more steady state, supporting all of families in Texas. And certainly that will require different funding going forward to maintain that kind of thing. So I don't know specifically on the plans for that. I think many folks are here. You could maybe ask them. But I just know it originally, and actually, like I said, it's actually still listed on the site where the funding is coming from very specifically. But then in Alabama, I think that the first class pre-K program now is actually primarily state funded, right? Yeah. Yeah. So that is, so I think they use their PDG funds more for their now new 3 school, or no, what do they call it, B3 program. But yeah, those are not emergency funds there. What else did I mention? DC, did you say? Virginia. Those are not emergency funds either. Actually, it's starting as a pilot with philanthropy, Virginia Early Childhood Foundation. And, but there's, I think, plans for future expansion. So it's kind of all over the place, I guess, is the answer to the question. A lot are leveraging emergency funds, certainly. But I think all are putting this in place with where do we look to the funding next? Because they don't want it to just be a temporary thing. But the opportunity to leverage emergency funds is certainly valuable right now.
So you talked about this in terms of, we started talking about the solutions. You talked about the providers put information about openings into the system in different ways.
Mhm.
And, you know, so we have multiple groups, you know, they have one opening, you know, they take care of, you know, something of them is one, something
Yeah.
is one.
Yeah.
How do you resolve that? I mean, from a parent perspective, if you're families, you know, it's irrelevant whether there's 3 or 1 opening.
Yeah.
As long as there's an opening
Yeah.
for that age. But if you're doing research for your information for funding or that kind of thing, you need to know it's just 1 opening, not 3.
Yeah.
So how do you feel with that?
Yeah, well, first, and sorry if it was confusing, we did basically address challenge and solution kind of together. So that's why we got to the slide. We're like, we already talked about this. But on that particular point, first of all, for families, you're right. So we just say, are there, like, it's a yes or no. Do you have openings for your particular age group you're searching for or not? That's how we don't actually show even the number of openings because we found that kind of, especially in the pandemic,
In
it
the
made it look
beginning, we
bad.
did, and
Yeah.
then we switched to that.
Yeah, so we kind of responded to like not making it look unfavorable for the provider because then it is not incentive for them to put in their true number and we want to know their true number. So balancing those sometimes competing needs to get the right information to who needs it. But in terms of actually collecting the information in the first place, so provider can say, I have 1 opening any age group. So for all my licensed age groups, if it's a state where you're licensed to serve specific age groups, then we can constrain them to only the age groups that they're licensed to serve. Or like if it's Pennsylvania where they can serve any age group, just as long as they're maintaining ratios, then they can just select which age groups they want to serve. And they can still constrain that, but it's up to them to do that. So they can put it in 1 opening, multiple age groups. Does that answer your question? You have,
It does, and then how does that interface with the analytics? Like,
Yeah.
you have a pie chart
yeah.
that have 1,400
Yep.
openings or supply with 1,400 spaces. So are there really 1,400 spaces or there's less than that? Divided up?
Yeah, so a lot of times it's up to our client actually how they want to represent the data. Like we're about collect the data and then customize the experience so that you're getting what you need out of it. But a lot of times what the answer is we want the total number of spots to add up to 100% of openings. So what we do is if they say I have 1 opening across 3 age groups, we'll do a third, divided by 3.
So the software.
Software does it. Yeah. So that's how their analytics dashboard is configured to show. They might also have they might have 2 different ways of looking at it, right? Where it's like, okay, but total number of potential openings for each age group. So that sums up to more than 100% of the openings, but you can kind of see the distribution of where those openings are. Those give you different information, right? Why restrict yourself to one or the other? You might only report it out to say the state one way, but all the better if you have that insight into like really seeing where there's distribution. Does that make sense?
One more quick question.
Yeah.
In Allegheny County, you will be Bridgecare. You mentioned now introducing CCMS. So will providers log into both systems or how will you navigate that? Will there be a split?
No, it's more about what date we would integrate. She should answer this question. I think I know, but let me just have the expert.
So, there's a lot of information in CCMS, right? So if you're actually like a funding source and you want to collect attendance information, for example, it's a good example. I know that Alliance Corps in the room is doing in Colorado. They're integrated with the state's attendance system so that they can providers don't have to have two places where families can report their attendance, right, or make it confusing or whatever. So that's one way to leverage data in CCMS. There's many ways, right? Even staff information, like if you use our workforce module, having your integration with your staff. So there's all kinds of ways that the information that's in childcare management software can be leveraged in Bridgecare, but specifically on topic of supply and demand, what we're talking about today. The difference between not licensed capacity, but desired capacity in your CCMS, and then your enrollment numbers kind of get us that openings number by age group that automatically integrates with Bridgecare. Now, the like updating photos and maybe your program description and like the things that you don't change all the time, but like one time you get set up in Bridgecare, that the provider would still do in Bridgecare. But then the more like frequently changing transactional information, that is the thing we're always otherwise having to ask them for, that integrates just directly and happens without them having to do anything.
So they'll no longer really need the portal because CCMS.
Yeah, and we
Yeah,
don't
just
even
for those one-time things of updating, but.
yeah, and we don't even have to send, like, we can just take them off the email list, so not even have to ask them for the
Yeah.
openings. Yeah. Well, I think we're right on time. Any last question? All right, well, we'll stick around too.